October 11th, 1973. The Pascagoula River, Mississippi. On a cool and calm fall evening in Jackson County, Mississippi, two local factory workers decide to head out fishing after a hard day's work. What would normally be a easy, relaxing night of enjoying nature would turn out to be anything but. What would happen that night would become one of the most popular and mysterious UFO stories and abductions of all time. An extraordinary enigma that is yet to be understood by science. What did these two men encounter on that fateful night that would propel the otherwise unknown area of Pascagoula into national headlines? Today on Unblurring the Unknown, the Pascagoula Incident. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic, and I decided this week we've taken a little hiatus from UFO and alien content as of late, so I have decided to venture back into the realm of UFOs because we've taken that little hiatus. I hope you all enjoyed the extended episode I put out last week, and I kind of wanted to go back into UFOs this week to change it up. I did some true crime, did some other stuff mixed in there, mostly true crime in the past couple weeks. So yeah, I want to get back into the realm of UFOs and aliens, as it's been a couple weeks. I felt like in the beginning I was very saturated with aliens and UFO content, and now I kind of got away from it, and now I'm back to it. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this week's episode. But before I get started, I do want to say that I am still a little bit congested from this head cold that's going around, so I do want to apologize if I sound a little bit stuffy. Now, today we venture to Pascagoula, Mississippi. Now, Pascagoula is an industrial city, and a safe one to live in at that, and it sits at the mouth of the Pascagoula River and where it meets the Atlantic Ocean. Now, this industrial town would end up being the site of one of the most famous UFO incidents in the world, and that is what we're going to dive into today. On October 11th, 1973, two local factory workers, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, decided to go fishing together down at the Pascagoula River after work one evening. As they were both fishing off a pier off the west bank of the south of the Pascagoula River, when they noticed a blue light reflecting off the water. Originally, Hickson and Parker thought it was the cops, and that they were being kicked off the property that they were on, but turns out that was not the case. As the two men looked up to see where the blue light was coming from, they looked up to the clouds where an almost blinding light was coming from. The light was accompanied by whizzing or whirring type sounds, and the craft began to take shape. The lights and sounds were coming from an object that the men had never seen before. An egg or oval-shaped UFO descended and appeared in front of them. The object has been slated to be roughly 30 to 40 feet long, 8 to 10 feet tall, with blue flashing lights on either side of it. Now, when the men saw the object, they had no idea what they were looking at. However, upon seeing the craft, both men said they felt paralyzed and that they were unable to move away or even talk to each other about what they were seeing. This object stopped moving and stayed hovering roughly 2 feet above the ground. As the men stood there, still unable to move, an exterior door from the craft slid open, and out of it came three unknown entities. They were described as roughly 6 feet tall, with long, thick legs, were kind of stocky and had broad shoulders, and their hands weren't hands at all, but rather looked more like crab-like pincers. They had no discernible facial features except for 3 spikes that protruded from their heads horizontally. Their skin was that of a wrinkled metallic gray color, and they could have been wearing suits of some sort. Now, these beings floated, yes, floated as in they could levitate, down from their craft and towards the two men. The figures descended towards the men and took hold of them with their crab-like pincers and lifted the men off the ground and brought them into their aircraft. The men described being floated into this unknown craft where they blacked out, and they recall knowing very little about what happened on board of the unknown craft. Now, what the men could recall during their time aboard the spacecraft was limited, like I mentioned, Hickson said that he could recall that he could float in the craft with no means of support. That basically means like gravity had no effect inside this aircraft, and for some reason, nothing was affected by gravity. And that Hickson would also say that he was subjected to a physical exam by a large mechanical scanning device with an eye on it that Hickson said looked like a giant football. Parker, on the other hand, was able to recall next to nothing about what happened on board the mysterious ship. The two men estimate they were on board the ship for approximately 20 minutes, and when the two men regained consciousness, they realized they were back on the pier with the craft nowhere in sight. Now, and rightfully so, the men were terrified from their experience. They had made it back to where their car was and sat in their car for almost an hour trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed and try and figure out what to do next. They both felt like their next plan of action would be get in touch with Keesler Air Force Base, which sat in the nearby town of Biloxi. When the men got in touch with the Air Force Base, the military personnel were extremely skeptical and said that they don't get involved with UFO-related instances, but they should go ahead and contact their local police force. Now, it was after this that Hickson and Parker decided to drive to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Now, they were convinced that no one would believe them, that they had this encounter and that they experienced an alien abduction. They thought, like I said, nobody would believe them. So to prove that they were out fishing, they brought along with them the catfish they had caught prior to their abduction. Pretty much to prove that, hey, we were fishing. This is proof that we were fishing. We were abducted by aliens. How that would prove that you were abducted by aliens, I don't know. But that was kind of their mindset, like, oh, we'll bring the fish along with us to prove that we were out there. Now, once they arrived at the sheriff's office, they had a preliminary interview with some members of the sheriff's office, and then the police officers contacted Sheriff Fred Diamond. When Diamond showed up at the station and sat down with the two men, he was very skeptical about the whole event, and even more so after Hickson had told Diamond that he consumed some whiskey after the event happened. Sheriff Diamond thought they were both drunk. The men spoke very honestly about the event they had just encountered, and Sheriff Diamond thought it would be a good idea if they took a break and resumed the interview in a few minutes. Now, what Hickson and Parker didn't realize is that the room was bugged with a hidden microphone. Diamond thought this event was fake, and that they were doing it for either fame or financial purposes, and had hoped to catch them in the act of discussing between themselves that this was a hoax. However, that didn't happen. What got recorded from the hidden recorder was not these two gentlemen pretending that something happened to them, but instead was them very genuinely talking about what happened, including them discussing the abduction that they remember, and the men kind of still dealing with the extreme emotional distress they were still in. Now, it would be reasonable to suspect exactly what Diamond thought, that this was some sort of elaborate hoax, and that if this was a hoax of some sort, they would be talking about it candidly when no one else was in the room. However, I will save my thoughts about the recording and all of that to the end, and we'll discuss that in theories. But on the surface, it would be, like I mentioned, realistic to assume that this was a hoax. The men were drunk, they were making this story up. So obviously, the two men, Hickson and Parker, didn't know that there was a hidden recorder in the room. So obviously, what got recorded was them genuinely discussing this and basically said, oh, they're still talking about this and they're talking about it very genuinely. So this must have actually happened. Now, at one point on the tape, Hickson even tells Parker, and I quote, "It scared me to death too, son. You can't get over it in a lifetime. Jesus Christ have mercy." Close quote. Now, I found the actual recording from that interview, and it's a few minutes long, so I'm going to play it for you. I think it's really cool and interesting. However, it is old. It's from 1973, so there's some bits and pieces of it that are kind of hard to hear, but you can make out some really good points out of it, so I do want to play that for you, and I will play that for you right now.
Jesus Christ. You hear about something like that, but you can't believe it. Yeah, you hear that, I know. Yeah, I know. Where is something the United States can have up there? No, it couldn't be. That wasn't done, though. Not what we seen, though. Not what we seen. It's something, and the Air Force and all know it's up there, too, see. And this ain't gonna be the only time this gonna happen again. Until they...
This shit, I'm like, had a heart attack, I ain't shit.
Well, I know.
I come one down and
I know that scared me to death, too, so...
I'm just standing there crying right now. I can't tell
I know that... It's something that you can't get over in a lifetime, see. Jesus Christ.
so damn bad about it, nobody's leaving. That's what
I
I'm
thought I had been through enough of hell on this earth, and now I have to go through something like that, see. But they could have, I guess they could have harmed us, son. They could have done anything to us if they didn't hurt me.
maybe why they just take that, so
I don't know. I don't know. I'm telling you, man, I couldn't take much more of that.
I know you home with the bear to get some nerve pills or something, see the doctor or something. I can't stand it. I'm back to all the paces.
I'll tell you about it when they get through this. We'll go about it. I'll get you something. Settle you down with so you get some damn sleep.
I can sleep now like it is. I'm just laying here crazy.
But yeah, when they brought you out of that damn thing, and when they brought me out, well, I like to know where the hell, God damn, I like to know where the hell got you straightened out, man.
When they Lawrence, I remember by heart, they just froze out just like that. I couldn't move, just like I stepped on a damn rattlesnake.
But they didn't do me that way, though.
I passed out. I passed out. That's the first time I ever passed out in my life. You shut the new medical records. It is. I've never seen them like that before in my life.
You can't make people believe that, though.
I don't know. Sit here and believe it out, because I
They
know
better wake up and start believing.
damn
They
right.
better wake up and start believing.
Damn right. Listen, I see.
Start believing.
I can't figure out the damn door. You see how that door come in on that side of the
Yeah,
chair?
I don't know how to open, son. I don't know.
I didn't see no door swing on.
I don't know how to open. I don't know how to
Shit on.
just see something like.
We look around and them damn blue lights and them son of bitches are just like that. They come out.
Yeah, no, you can't believe it. You can't make people believe it.
I paralyzed right there. I couldn't move.
They're gonna believe it one of these days. They're gonna believe it one of these days. Might be too late. I knew all along there was people from out of the world up there. I knew all along.
Now, like I mentioned, this added a feeling to Sheriff Diamond that these men must be telling the truth about what happened to them that night. And to build on this, the skeptics within the department, and just from the disbelief from a lot of people who heard the story, people were skeptical. Aliens was not a huge thing at this point. Obviously, the Betty and Barney Hill abduction was years prior. The idea of aliens, 60s, 70s, 80s, was a very controversial topic and not one that was easily discussed with people. So, the skeptics within the department felt like the two men should take a polygraph test, aka a lie detector, to make sure they were telling the truth. Now, both Hickson and Parker agreed to volunteer for the polygraph test. However, Parker would end up backing out for reasons unknown. Now, it's also important to note about Parker during the interrogation. He didn't really say much, if anything, about what happened when Sheriff Diamond was in there, when other members of the police were in there, and Hickson did much of the talking the entire time. And Parker's lack thereof of talking could be attributed to the emotional stress he was under. However, there's kind of a theory that connects with that, and I will save that to the end. After the polygraph exam on Hickson, the examiner found that Hickson was telling the truth about the story and genuinely felt like he had been abducted. Of course, polygraph tests aren't always the best tool to determine authenticity, as they are easy to fake. Please keep that in mind. Obviously, I don't know what goes into the art of faking a lie detector test by any means, so I don't know in turn how you can fake one. However, a lot of people discredit lie detector tests. I think there's probably a little bit of some shred of truth in some lie detector tests, but that's just a personal opinion. a lot of people state they are very easy to fake. So a lot of people don't consider the polygraph test, to be genuine evidence because you can fake a lie detector test. So people are gonna be skeptics no matter what you do, really. Now, after this story with Hickson and Parker hit the news media outlets, it blew up immediately. Now, it turned the city of Pascagoula into a full-blown media circus, with everyone trying to get a piece of the story of 2 local factory workers being abducted by aliens. Because of this, Hickson and Parker tried to avoid the media attention by fleeing to nearby Jones County, Mississippi. Parker continued to take the encounter very hard throughout his young life, and even though he didn't talk much about the encounter when he was young, he grew around to talking about it years later, and that is where many questions come into play about the authenticity of their encounter. Initially, Hickson stated that the reason Parker had trouble talking about the event and recounting what actually happened was because of the emotional stress he was under, and that he had not experienced something like that before, something that was that trauma-inducing, something that was that stressful, whereas Hickson was a Korean War vet, and he said that he had witnessed atrocities during the war, which allowed him to be more comfortable with the idea of discussing disturbing topics. That's pretty much a synopsis, of course, which, to me, that part makes sense, and I can believe that, because during this abduction, Calvin Parker was only 18, 19 years old, where Hickson was 43, I believe. So there's a significant age gap there. Hickson's obviously seen more in life than Parker has. So this part makes a lot of sense. Obviously, if Hickson served in the Korean War, he experienced the atrocities of war, he becomes a lot more desensitized to that kind of thing. Whereas Hickson and Parker, would probably be kind of traumatic for him. So that, to me, makes a lot of sense. Now, almost 2 decades later after the abduction, Parker gave a much more detailed account on what had happened that night on the Pascagoula River. During this interview, he confessed that he did not faint like he initially claimed, and relayed a story that included being brought down a long corridor in the alien vessel that led to a room where he was examined by a quote-unquote petite female alien. Those are his words, not mine. Despite being under paralysis and in and out of consciousness, he says that he remembers, and I'm serious about, this is serious. This is what he actually said. So please keep that in mind. This is I'm not making this up. I'm being serious. That he remembers a large needle being injected into the base of his penis, and that the alien communicated with him telepathically and told him that he had been taken for a specific purpose, but tried to comfort him nonetheless. Now, if you think that story, or that part of the story, is a little crazy, just wait. I got more for you. Parker would go on as well to state a claim in which he was abducted by the same spacecraft 19 years later. Now, Parker goes on to recall that when he encountered the aircraft 19 years later, this time he went freely and boarded the craft, and he met the same female alien to examine him back in 1973, and that same female alien told him the following. Now, instead of communicating with him telepathically, this time she spoke to him in perfect English. She told him that they both worshiped the same God and verified the Bible's authenticity. Now, you might be thinking a couple things, and I will save that till theories. Now, this female alien would also say that her race wanted to live on Earth with humans, but felt like humans were too prone to violence and destruction, and that it wouldn't be safe for them. Like I said, I don't want to fully dive into this set of statements, as we'll get over to it a little bit in the theory section, but to me, this puts a lot of the whole thing in doubt, because it went from an already far-fetched story to most skeptics to kind of a realm in which now even believers are going to have a hard time believing that this even happened to begin with. However, this story that Parker provided years after the fact was not the only inconsistency with the story. UFO investigator Joe Nickell states that during the initial abduction, Hickson behaved in a quote-unquote questionable manner and would change some instances of the story during talk show or TV appearances, and claimed that the entire thing was made up by Hickson during a hypnagogic hallucination. Now, that's Joe Nickell stating that he thinks that it was made up through a hallucination. Now, we have talked about those forms of hallucinations, on the show before, so I'm kind of familiar with that. We've gone over it a little bit before, however, I'm not going to dive into it. Now, Joe Nickel would also claim that Calvin Parker went along with this story because he genuinely did pass out at one point, and because of him only being 18, 19 when this story took place, his highly impressionable brain believed what Hickson had told him actually happened. Now, that is merely speculation from Nickel's part on what he thinks actually happened to Hickson and Parker. However, it is important to note that some of this entire story seems very genuine, and then some of it seems really embellished. Now, Hickson would pass away in 2011, while Parker is still alive currently, and they have both written numerous books on the events of that day, which that always adds to skeptics who thinks the event was made up, that, they're writing books to get a couple extra bucks from what they went through. It kind of adds to every skeptic's playbook in terms of whether or not something actually happened. Now, some further questions have been raised to the polygraph that Hickson took as well back in 1973. The examiner was reportedly still in training for the polygraph testing when he offered Hickson to take the polygraph, and Hickson's lawyer, now, I don't know if Hickson got a lawyer after this event or if he had one before this event. The idea that Hickson's lawyer comes into play in this, I think, is very suspicious to begin with, but nonetheless, he's in the story. Now, Hickson's lawyer, when they proposed the idea of taking the polygraph test again because they felt like the examiner was still in training, let's bring up a more experienced polygraph trainer to interview Hickson a second time, Hickson's lawyer refused and said they didn't need to, which to me both makes sense and both doesn't make sense, because on one side of it makes sense. Okay, you took the polygraph test once. If you're a lawyer, you can say, my client was under severe emotional distress. He doesn't want to relive that again by taking another polygraph test. Okay, that makes sense. On the flip side of that, if you know that the polygraph examiner was still in training and that it could be more easily faked, you would want to do another polygraph so you actually know that he's really, really telling the truth. So there's both sides to that I can believe. However, Hickson's lawyer obviously refused and said they didn't need to do the second polygraph test. Now, this whole fact about the polygraph examination and everything like that was presented by UFO skeptic investigator Philip Klass. Now, to me, obviously I mentioned another UFO skeptic investigator earlier. Now, to me, the idea of the UFO skeptic's findings and finding any sort of dirt about any UFO incident that happens is kind of par for the course. So I would always take this factoid, and even any factoid presented by a skeptic, with kind of a grain of salt, because in some way, shape, or form, they have a horse in the race, if that makes any sense, if you understand that analogy. To them, they want to disprove it. To a believer, where they want to prove it. So you have both sides of it that are both fighting about the authenticity of a story. So a UFO skeptic is probably going to come up with any explanation as to what happened. Obviously, it's one thing about being a partial skeptic who's like, I'm not really going to believe this. But if you're a full-blown skeptic and you're saying, he denied the second polygraph, he did this, he did that, I think that's a very closed-minded way of looking at it. I think you need to look at these events with an open mind and just take the ideas and the facts that are presented by skeptics with a grain of salt. Just with taking the facts from believers with a grain of salt. I think it's important to just look at all the facts straight through. So, again, take this idea about the polygraph with a grain of salt, but I did want to share it, so just please keep it in mind as we continue through the story. Now, with that being said, this entire event in abduction is wild start to finish. And what kind of stands out to me in this story is the description of the aliens, as honestly, I've never heard of this description type in the past before, and how quickly, just the event started and it ended. It was very quick. They said approximately 20 minutes after they were abducted, they were back on the pier in which they were fishing. So that to me is kind of surprising. But in a previous episode, I also covered the Allagash abductions, which take place 3 years after this event. And that encounter is much longer. And although the manner in which they were taken was actually very similar, it makes me wonder whether or not this truly happened, obviously, with a lot of UFO abduction cases having very similar kind of MO, if that's the word you want to use, compared to other cases in the past. So I think every UFO abduction story, there's always everybody taking it with a grain of salt, more than just somebody seeing some lights in the sky and saying, okay, this is a UFO, or having an encounter that's otherworldly. The UFO abductions really takes it to another step where it's really hard for anybody to believe that it actually happened. So this entire story, I think it makes sense why people consistently question it, and just question UFO abduction cases in general. But with that being said, let's get into theories. Now, our first theory is that this is true. Now, this theory would mean that this event was true, and what Hickson and Parker experienced that night in 1973 was genuine, and that they were really abducted by aliens. Now, if you want to believe this theory, you have some evidence to support this, most notably being the hidden recorder in the interrogation room. If this was fake, it would be impossible for Hickson and Parker to know that the recorder was in the room, and that kind of adds to the idea that they weren't faking it. Now, they also took a polygraph. Keep in mind that was only Hickson that took the polygraph. Even though there is split opinions on the effectiveness of the lie detector test, he still did take one, and he still did pass. And you could also point to the idea of Parker's psychological state after the event would also prove to the fact that this happened, as I feel like something like Parker's emotional distress and kind of how he was acting would be something that would be pretty hard to fake. Now, our second theory is just that. Our second theory is titled Fake. Now, this is pretty cut and dry, in that this theory states that this is a hoax. The two men concocted some sort of fake alien story and ran with it to try and make a quick buck through public appearances, books, TV deals, rights to the story to make a movie, whatever it could be. Their goal was to make a quick buck. Now, you could even couple this together with the idea that the emotional distress the two men were under was faked, and they made an oath to each other to stand by the story even during the times when investigators weren't in the room. So this would imply that they really committed to the roles. They were almost like actors. They committed to this role, and they're like, all right, we're going to pretend that this happened no matter what. We're going to pretend like it happened to everybody else in the pursuit of getting a lot of money. Now, once Pascagoula became a hub for media outlets to come and pick up the news of the story, that's when Hickson and Parker moved away, so they would be able to keep their story a secret. They could avoid the media for numerous years, just to kind of, or at least the initial media push, to basically say, okay, we can kind of lay low for a little bit, and then when we're ready to kind of sell the story a little bit more, then we can kind of come out of hiding. Obviously, Hickson being the older of the two, maybe this was his idea, and he kind of took charge and said, all right, Calvin, you don't have to say as much. You can come out later or whatever you want to do. I'll do a lot of the heavy lifting, and we'll both get some money off of this. Again, just a theory, but an interesting one. I think fake is something that always comes up because there is money associated in faking UFO stories and UFO related content. Now, our third theory is embellished. Now, this theory relies on the idea that the story was in fact real, however, greatly embellished over the course of time. What Hickson and Parker saw that night was genuine, and maybe it was a UFO, and maybe they were abducted. Now, they stood by this story, and this explains the genuine and honest reaction while being recorded and the passing of the polygraph test. However, Hickson and Parker, when realizing that they could profit off their emotional trauma, they took this opportunity to make as much as they could from the story. For example, this would explain why Hickson's story would often change during some talk shows, as he kept adding tidbits to the story that may or may not have been real. Parker obviously wouldn't comment to the story, but at the time, and then later when he did, he made up the story about seeing the craft 19 years later to perhaps maybe sell his book, sell something else, maybe get some more news articles written about him, who knows. But this kind of would make sense, as I believe the statement he made about the aliens believing in the same God as humans and believing in the Bible, that makes little to no sense to me whatsoever. Obviously, I don't put a religious spin on this. I don't put a political spin on any of these episodes. However, the idea of an alien coming down and saying, "Oh yes, we believe in God," or "We believe in Jesus," and "Oh, everything in the Bible happened." Well, that just it just seems very odd to me, because it's like, it's not like I know anything about aliens. What would you think, that an alien from another world would believe in Jesus or believe in the Bible? Probably not. Again, that's just my 2 cents, but I think that's probably a hard pass. So I think the root of the story is real, but there's all this extra stuff that was kind of made up after the fact that maybe is not so real. Now, our last theory, and this one is a little bit out there, but it's kind of fun to do a little bit of speculation and question about, well, what happened. Our last theory is drugged. Now, this theory would be that perhaps in some way Hickson drugged Parker to believe that this story was real. Now, Hickson maybe knew the money and fame he could get from making up an elaborate UFO abduction story, but knew maybe Parker would not make up the story willingly. So he drugged Parker through some way, shape, or form, maybe gave him a little booze, kind of say, put some spicy drugs in there, made him pass out, and then once Parker woke up, Hickson spun him this whole yarn about being abducted by aliens, and that there was this craft and there was a spaceship and they experimented on us, and this would send Parker into some sort of emotional distress because he thinks that this actually happened. And then Parker would keep with the story because that's what he was told, that's what he believes, and Hickson would just double down on the story. Now, Parker wouldn't truly know what happened, and from perhaps believing that he was abducted from what Hickson told him, his mental state would falter, and that's kind of where we get the story about being abducted 19 years later, when that too probably did not happen. Now, Parker would probably think that if this was the case, that he was maybe going crazy in some sort, and this would make him make up the story. Again, this is all speculation. There is no evidence to support the idea that Hickson drugged Parker. But, like I said, it's fun to speculate, it's fun to think about, and it does make a little bit of sense. If you were to think about it, or if you were to put a magnifying glass over it, it could make a little bit of sense, and I could definitely see that happening. But for my personal theory is that this story was embellished. I think that I want to go with the idea that this story was real just because of the recording, because of what the men say that they saw. I want to believe it. And with that fact, I do believe it. I do believe the initial encounter was genuine. However, I think when the opportunity arose to make a quick buck, to profit off a story or profit off your trauma, they took it. And they took this story and they ran with it to pretty much get as much as they could from it and kind of milk it for all it's worth. But, like I said, I think the root of this story is real, because I think there's a lot of evidence that points to the idea that the root of the story is real. What Hickson and Parker saw that night was genuine, was an actual UFO. Whether or not they got abducted, that could be up for debate, but I think they genuinely saw a UFO. And then, like I said, once realized that they could make some money off of this, they ran with it. They ran with it to the ground. Maybe Parker was more hesitant to make up the story, but once he got older in life, he's like, maybe I could use a couple extra bucks from appearances or interviews or whatever. So later in life, he decided to say, all right, hey, I'll come forward and I'll do my interviews. I can make an extra couple bucks here and there. So to me, that's what I'm going to go with. I think that the story, like I said, is genuine, however, greatly embellished over time for maybe fame or financial reasons. But with that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode on the Pascagoula abduction. I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, back to UFOs after taking a long hiatus from it. And again, I hope to keep it kind of varying from week to week, so you're not getting bored, or you're getting oversaturated with true crime or oversaturated with cryptids or so on and so forth. But with that being said, since it is the end of the episode, I do want to do my obligatory plug time, or if you are listening to this on Spotify, please turn on post notifications. Please like the show on Spotify. And when you turn on notifications, you will get notified every time I post a new episode. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe to keep up with the channel. and you will also get notified every time I post a new video. I greatly appreciate it. I appreciate all the support I've been getting, and I got really great feedback on the Mr. Cruel special. So I'm very, very excited at the direction in which the podcast is going. This would make episode 25. So I'm having a lot of fun doing this, and I'm dedicating a lot of my personal time to doing this, and I don't regret any bit of it. And I'm having a blast doing this for you all, and I just hope it continues to grow in the way I see it growing. But yeah, I will also be posting the custom cover art to this week's episode to Instagram as well, so feel free to check that out on my Instagram, Unblurring the Unknown, at Instagram. Now, if you also aren't aware, I do this at the end of every episode, but I have been actually getting some topic suggestions in, but you can send me more. I've gotten a few, but please send me topic suggestions to my email. That is unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. That is where you can send me your topic suggestions. I will take them, throw them into the episode queue, because I have a never-ending list of topics for episodes, and I will see what I can do in doing research and possibly getting that out and turned into an episode. But with that being said, that is going to conclude this week's episode on the Pascagoula incident. Thank you for the overwhelming support. I greatly appreciate it. And with that being said, I will see you all on the next one.